He was the most powerful alpha in the 7 pack territories. Widowed, grieving, and completely alone. So he did something no king had ever done. He disguised himself as a poor wanderer and went looking for a wife, not a political match, not a bonded alliance arranged by council lords, a real one. He visited the great pack houses. He sat at their tables as a commoner. He watched how their daughters treated a man with nothing. Most laughed. Some were cruel. A few were simply indifferent. And then, in the smallest, most forgotten corner of the Packlands, he met the one no one wanted. The one everyone had given up on. The one who looked at a man with nothing and gave him everything she had. He never expected her. She never expected any of this. And the moment he told her the truth, everything changed. Alpha King Rael. Stonecrest had ruled the Stonecrest Pack for 11 years. He was 36, broad-shouldered, with dark hair gone slightly silver at the temples, and eyes the deep gray of mountain granite, steady, unreadable, and exhausting to hold for long. He had commanded armies, settled border wars between rival packs, and made decisions that shaped the lives of thousands without flinching once. He had flinched exactly once. The morning they told him Mira was gone. His bonded mate of 7 years, taken by a fever that came fast and left nothing. No warning, no time. 1 week she was laughing in the garden. The next week she wasn't anywhere. That had been 2 years ago. The pack needed a new bonded queen. His council lords had been circling the subject for 18 months, with the delicacy of men who understood they were handling something that could detonate. He had listened to every proposal, reviewed every candidate from every allied pack family, sat through 3 formal introduction ceremonies where beautifully dressed Omegas looked at him with calculated warmth, and he felt nothing except the exhausting awareness that he was being assessed as a political asset, not known as a person. He told his most trusted advisor, Corm, what he intended to do on a cold morning in early autumn. "You're going to do what?" "Travel. As a commoner. Visit the pack families with unbonded daughters, and see how they behave when they think I have nothing." Corm stared at him for a long moment. "My lord, that is either the wisest thing you've ever said, or the beginning of a serious problem." "Probably both," Rael said. "Pack my plainest clothes." He traveled with only Corm and 1 disguised guard. No pack mark displayed. No Stonecrest colors. A plain wool cloak, worn boots, a story about being a minor land steward from the northern reaches, respectable enough not to be turned away at doors, humble enough to reveal exactly how people behaved toward someone they considered beneath them. The first 3 houses were studies in polished disappointment. At House Varen, a prosperous beta merchant family with 2 daughters, who had been positioned for alpha bonding since birth, both young women were exquisitely mannered for exactly as long as it took to determine he had no territory. After that, one found pressing reasons to be elsewhere, and the other spent the dinner discussing the bonding prospects of her friend, who had recently matched with an alpha lord of considerable landholding. Isn't that wonderful? Rael ate his soup and learned nothing he hadn't already suspected. At House Caldwell, old pack blood, proud, slightly reduced in circumstance, the eldest daughter looked him over with the frank assessment of a woman evaluating livestock, and said within his hearing to her mother, "He smells like North Road dust. What exactly is his holding worth?" He thanked them for their hospitality and left before dessert. At House Mare, the largest and most prestigious stop on his circuit, saw a family with close council connections and an Omega daughter widely considered the most eligible in the Western Territories. The welcome was warm, elaborate, and completely hollow. The daughter, Lisa, was beautiful and practiced, and spoke to him in the careful, musical tone of someone performing warmth, rather than feeling it. When he mentioned, carefully, that his northern holdings had been damaged by a bad season, and he was uncertain of his finances, her attention drifted to the window with the patience of someone waiting for a tedious conversation to end. "How unfortunate," she said. "I do hope things improve for you." He rode away from House Mare in the early evening with Corm beside him, and 3 weeks of travel behind him, and exactly nothing to show for it. "There's one more," Corm said, consulting the list he'd been given by the Council Records Office. "Though I'll warn you, it wasn't on the original list. I added it myself." "Why wasn't it on the list?" Corm was quiet for a moment. "Because no one thinks of them. The Ren family, minor beta line. Father died last year. One daughter, unbonded, 26, considered past the usual age. The council wouldn't have proposed her. Why not? She's been passed over 4 times. Formal introductions that came to nothing. The pack gossip is unkind about it." Corm paused. "I included her because I thought you should see the whole picture." Rael looked at the road ahead. "How far?" "Half a day's ride? Then we go." The Wren holding was small. Not charmingly small, genuinely, practically small. A stone farmhouse with a vegetable garden that was clearly the work of someone who needed it to actually produce food. A modest stable with 2 horses. A yard that was clean and well kept in the specific way of people who have learned that effort is the only thing standing between order and collapse. Rael noted all of this as they rode up the track. A woman was in the garden. Not arranging flowers, not sitting decoratively near a window. Actually in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, doing something purposeful with a row of late-season root vegetables. Dark hair escaping from a practical knot. A smudge of soil on her jaw that she apparently hadn't noticed or didn't care about. She looked up when she heard the horses. No performance of surprise, no quick smoothing of her dress or touching of her hair, and she simply looked at them with direct, calm eyes, the warm brown of turned earth, and stood up, brushing her hands on her apron. "Good afternoon," she said. "Are you lost or looking for something?" It was, Rael would think later, the most honest greeting he'd received in 3 weeks of travel. "Looking, I think," he said. "My name is Rael. I was told this was the Ren holding." "It is. I'm Nora Ren." She looked at them both with the unhurried assessment of someone who has learned to read situations quickly. "You've been traveling. Come in. I'll put water on." No calculation. No performance. Just, "You look tired. Come inside." He dismounted. The inside of the house was what the outside had promised. Modest, clean, and lived in with real life, rather than arranged for appearance. Books stacked on a side table. A shawl on the back of a chair that someone had clearly been wearing recently. A pot of something that smelled like vegetable soup simmering on the hearth. No staff. Nora brought the water herself, set out bread and the last of what appeared to be a jar of preserved plums with a straightforwardness that suggested this was simply what you did when travelers arrived. You fed them. "You're from the northern reaches?" she said, sitting across from him with her own cup. "The far north, yes. Minor stewardship." She nodded, not with the polite disinterest he'd grown used to, but as if she was actually filing the information. "How are the roads? I've heard the autumn rains hit the northern passes badly this year." "They did. It's been a difficult season." "For most people," she said, not with false sympathy, just acknowledgement. "My father's crops failed the last year before he died. I know what a bad season looks like." She said it simply, without self-pity, and without invitation for pity. Just a fact she was sharing because it was relevant. Rael looked at her. "I'm sorry about your father. Thank you, he was a good man. The holding's been mine to manage since." A brief pause. "It's manageable." He almost smiled at the precision of that word. Manageable. Not fine. Not wonderful. Exactly what it was. "You're alone here?" "Mostly. A neighbor helps with the heavy work when needed. I help him with his records. I'm better with numbers than he is." She said this with a matter-of-fact lack of self-deprecation that struck him. No apology for what she was. No inflation of it either. Just, here's what I do and what I'm good at. "You keep your own accounts?" "Someone has to." She refilled his cup without being asked. "The steward my father used had a talent for making the numbers say what he wanted them to say. I learned to do it myself. Rael set down his cup. That's a useful skill. It keeps me from being cheated, she said, which counts for more than useful. He stayed longer than he'd planned. The conversation moved without effort, from the roads to the seasonal markets, to the price of grain, to the way pack territory disputes rippled down to affect even small holdings like hers. She had opinions, considered ones, that she stated without either aggression or apology. At one point, he said, carefully, that he'd had a difficult few years, a loss he was still carrying. She didn't press him for details, didn't offer performed sympathy. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Grief has its own timeline. It doesn't care what anyone thinks is appropriate." Simple, true, no theater around it. When he mentioned, as he had at every other house, that his northern holdings had suffered and his finances were uncertain, he watched her face. Nothing changed. Not her expression, not her posture, not the quality of her attention. She nodded with the same calm she'd had since they arrived. Hard years come. If you're capable and honest, that changes. That was all. No assessment of his worth. No subtle recalibration of her interest. Just hard years come. He rode away from the Ren holding in the late afternoon, the mountains catching the last light. Corm quiet beside him. They'd ridden a mile before either of them spoke. "Well?" said Corm. "Yes," said Rael. Saw another half-mile of silence. "She didn't care," Rael said. "About any of it. The money, the status. None of it moved her." "No," Corm agreed. "She just fed you soup and told you grief has its own timeline." Rael looked at the road. "I'm going back tomorrow." He went back 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, each time as himself, or rather, as the version of himself that existed without rank. Rael, the northern steward. A man with a past he didn't fully explain, and a future he didn't discuss. Each visit lasted longer than the one before. She showed him the holdings account books once, not to impress him, but because he'd asked an intelligent question about crop rotation, and one thing led to another. The books were meticulous, color-coded, cross-referenced with margin notes in a small, precise hand. "Your father taught you this?" "My father taught me the basics. I built the rest myself after I realized no one else was going to." She grew the lavender at the south edge of the kitchen garden because, she explained, it dried well, and she sold it at the autumn market. She kept bees in 2 hives near the old apple trees. She had strong views about the proper ratio of fat to flour in a good pastry, and no patience whatsoever for people who didn't mean what they said. He liked her, genuinely simply liked her, a feeling so uncomplicated it was almost unfamiliar. On the 3rd visit she made tea, and they sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the garden as the sun went down, and she told him about the 4 formal bonding introductions that had come to nothing. She told it without bitterness, almost with a dry humor, as if describing events that had happened to someone else. "The first family decided my holding was too small. The second, I still don't know exactly why. The third, the candidate took one look at me, and I could see him calculating. I wasn't worth the calculation." A pause. "The 4th was the worst. He was perfectly pleasant for 2 days, and then I overheard him telling his companion I was too plain and too opinionated. He wasn't wrong about the opinionated part." Rael looked at her. "He was wrong about everything else." She glanced at him, a brief, unguarded look, surprised in spite of herself. Then she looked back at the garden. "You're kind to say so." "I'm not kind. I'm accurate." A short silence. Then, Oz very quietly, "That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a year." And something in Rael's chest that had been frozen for 2 years shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way ice moves at the very beginning of a thaw. On the 4th visit, he told her the truth. He had rehearsed it, had planned a careful, measured explanation, had thought through the exact words. What actually happened was that they were walking the edge of the apple orchard in the early morning. She was checking the hives, he was simply there, and she said something that made him laugh, and in the moment after the laugh he said, "Nora, I have to tell you something." She looked at him, read his face, and he could see the moment she understood something was coming. She went still, but not afraid. Braced. "My name is Rael Stonecrest," he said. "I'm the Alpha King." The silence lasted a long time. "The Alpha King," she repeated. "Yes." "Of the Stonecrest Pack." "Yes." She looked at him for a long, searching moment. Then she sat down on the old stone fence at the orchard's edge, not dramatically, but the way people sit when they need a moment before they can trust their legs. "You came here pretending to be a minor steward." "Yes." "To see how people behaved when they thought you had nothing." He didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. "How many houses?" "4, before yours." Another long silence. And you were the only one," he said quietly, "who didn't change." She looked at her hands in her lap. The garden, the hives, the small, real, hard-won life she'd built in this corner of the Packlands that no one had bothered to put on a council list. "I'm angry," she said. "I know. You should have told me." "Yes. I served you soup from a pot I was hoping would last 3 days." "I know. I'm sorry." She was quiet for a long time. "Why did you come back?" she said finally. "After the first day. Why didn't you just make your decision from that and go?" He thought about it honestly. "Because I didn't want to leave," he said. "Because talking to you was the first time in 2 years I forgot, for a few hours, that I was supposed to be something specific. You just talked to me, like I was a person." Another silence. "Your bonded mate," she said slowly. "You lost her. 2 years ago. And the council has been pushing for a new bond. For 18 months. She absorbed this. Her face was hard to read. Not closed, just working through something complicated at her own pace. "I'm 26, she said at last. "I've been passed over 4 times. I live alone in a holding smaller than your probably stables. I am nobody's idea of a queen." "No," he said. "You're mine." She looked up. "I'm not asking you to be a symbol or a political arrangement," he said. "I'm asking you because you looked at a man with nothing and gave him your last jar of preserved plums. Because you keep your own accounts so no one can cheat you. Because you think grief has its own timeline. Because you're honest and capable, and you don't perform anything." He paused. "I'm asking because I like who I am when I'm talking to you, and I haven't been able to say that about many things in a long time." Nora was quiet. The bees moved between the apple trees in the cool morning air. The mountains stood at the edge of the sky. "I'll need to think," she said. "Of course. And I'll need an honest answer to something. Anything." She looked at him directly. "Do you actually want a wife? Or do you want someone to fill a role so the council stops talking?" It was the most important question anyone had asked him in 2 years. He answered it without flinching. "I want someone who'll tell me when I'm wrong," he said. "Someone who'll keep her own accounts and disagree with me about things that matter and not perform warmth she doesn't feel. I've had the political arrangement. I don't want another one." A long pause. "You had a real bond before," she said softly. "Yes." "And you want that again?" "I didn't think I did," he said honestly, "until about 10 days ago." She made him wait 4 days. He respected that. More than respected it. It was exactly what he should have expected from her, and the waiting felt right, in a way that the practiced welcomes of the great pack houses never had. On the 4th day, a letter arrived at the inn where he and Corm were staying in the nearby village. It was written in the small, precise hand he recognized from the account book margins. "I have 3 conditions. First, I keep my own accounts. All of them, including whatever I'm entitled to in a bonding arrangement. I don't delegate what I can do myself. Second, when I think you're wrong, I'll say so. Privately when possible, but I won't pretend agreement I don't have. Third, we do this slowly. I am not performing a role. If that changes, if this becomes something I don't recognize, I'll tell you, and I'll expect you to listen. If those conditions are acceptable, my answer is yes." Rael read it twice. Then he handed it to Corm, who read it, folded it with great care, and handed it back. She's going to be magnificent, Corm said. I know, said Rael. The bonding ceremony was small. The council lords had presented elaborate plans for a state celebration. 7 packs represented, banquet for 300, a formal procession through the pack capital. Rael declined all of it. The woman I'm bonding to kept herself alive on preserved plums and account books, he told the senior council lord. She doesn't need 300 guests. She needs a ceremony that means what it says. The bond vows were read in the Stonecrest Great Hall with 40 people present. The council's required witnesses, Corm, Riva from Nora's neighboring holding, and Nora's 2 closest people from the village. Nora wore her own clothes, a dress she'd made herself, deep blue wool, no court embroidery. She had arranged her hair simply. She looked more herself than anyone Rael had seen in a formal setting in 11 years of rule. When the pack elder asked if she accepted the bond, she looked at Rael for one quiet moment first, the kind of look that is both a check and a decision reconfirmed, and then said clearly, I accept. The years that followed were years of learning. The pack court was not easy territory for a woman who had arrived without lineage, without the usual social architecture, without any interest in performing what she was not. There were council lords who looked at her and saw the small holding and the 4 failed introductions and calculated privately that this had been a mistake. They recalculated as the years went on, because Nora Ren, Nora Stonecrest, brought to that position the same qualities she'd brought to every other: honesty, precision, a refusal to be cheated or charmed into agreement she didn't genuinely feel. She learned the council politics with the same thoroughness she'd brought to her account books. She asked questions that nobody had thought to ask because everyone else assumed somebody else was handling it. She kept the conditions of her letter. When she thought Rael was wrong, she said so. Privately when possible. He listened, not always immediately, not always without friction, but he listened. Because he had asked specifically for this and he knew the value of it. Their arguments were real, and their reconciliations were real, and the life between them was real in the specific, irreplaceable way that only things without performance can be. A son came first, then a daughter. Nora taught them what she knew. Keep your own accounts. Say what you mean. Grief has its own timeline. Hard years come, and capable, honest people weather them. Rael watched her with the quiet, particular pride of a man who chose well and knew it. There was an evening, years later, when they were sitting in the Stonecrest garden as the sun went down, the mountains pink at the edges, the packlands spread out below them, the children long asleep, and Rael said, You know what I think about sometimes? What? The jar of preserved plums. Nora laughed. A real laugh. The kind she'd always had, unperformed and slightly surprised at itself. I was so annoyed about those plums, she said. I'd been saving them. I know, I'm still sorry. You should be. But she was smiling. Though I suppose you've compensated adequately. He looked at her. Just adequately? Don't push it. He smiled. And it was the smile of a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because fate had arranged it, not because a council of lords had selected it, but because he had gone looking for something real and found it in the smallest, most overlooked corner of the packlands, in a woman with dirt on her jaw, and a precise handwriting and 3 conditions. The Alpha King, who pretended to have nothing, discovered the only thing worth having. Not a match, not an alliance, not a performance. Someone who looked at a man with nothing and gave him everything she had. That is the kind of love that lasts.